All right, folks, we're back. Our second conversation for the day. It's about 24 minutes after the hour. I want to remind you that we're here at the ASU GSV Innovation Conference. I'm Casey Green. This is a collaborative project involving eSchool Media and Shindig. We're on the Shindig platform. I want to remind also many of you that you can ask questions either through text or through video. We'll be vetting some of those questions if you've got them for us for our conversation with Jim Ptaszynski, who is a senior fellow at the Gates Foundation. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Casey.
Just here. Full disclosure, I should add that the foundation is a sponsor of this, is to provide a little bit of financial support for us to bring these conversations both live from San Diego and to do the archiving. So let's talk about post-secondary education. Jim, you've had an interesting career. At one point, you worked for about a decade with colleges and universities. You spent 20 years higher education Microsoft, and now you've been at the foundation for a year. A lot of that, your career has been, like for many of us, an issue about how do we leverage technology. What are we doing, and particularly in higher ed, and especially for teaching and learning, as you kind of reflect back and think forward, short of the conversation as we get to about what the foundation's supporting, what have we done well, and where do we need to, what are the opportunities to do better? We've had great aspirations. Sometimes, it's sort of a reach and grasp issue.
Right. I think that's an excellent question. I think one of the things that I look at and what surprises me is the slow pace of change. Now, higher education tends to be painted with that brush an awful lot, and inappropriately so. I think there are some times where slow change is important and a value inside of higher education. On the other hand, there's tremendous innovation that's going on that many people don't recognize. But I think the thing
wait a second. So give me an example of that unrecognized innovation, something that should be just heralded, screamed from and blown all over the internet.
So I think that many colleges and universities are now really looking at affordability and what can they do to reduce the costs for students, as well as put together packages that allow students to graduate debt-free. So one of the ones that I'm thinking of, I was just visiting the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill last week, and Dr. Shirley Ort there does this program. She's the Associate Provost for Financial Aid, called the Carolina Covenant, where students of low income can graduate debt-free. So I think there are things like that that may not on the surface sound innovative, but really have a tremendous impact on students.
All right. I just wanted to, my tendency is when people say that there's something innovative going on, the question is show me. So very grounded in terms of my Midwest origins.
Yep.
All right. So that's one example of doing well. Two or three others that may come to mind.
Well, one of the things, again, I saw on an East Coast learning trip last week was the significant integration of what we're at the foundation calling next digital courseware, generation courseware. And whereas many faculty members are thinking of courseware as old style kill and drill, or at best ebooks, flat files, there is some really interesting things going on in the classrooms where faculty members are integrating this and providing assessment, real-time assessment for themselves and for their students. So when I used to be a faculty member and would look out at a class, I couldn't tell who was doing what or who was getting what, whereas now these tools allow you as a faculty member to understand the assessment of where students are, and then you can remediate in real time. So I think that's really interesting.
That's a little bit of a conversation I had yesterday with your colleague Rahim Rajan from the foundation, but I also had it with Chris Willig, who's the Vice President for K-12 Education at McGraw-Hill, talking about how the evolution of courseware. As I think back to some of the early courseware initiatives from the 1980s that were linked to the arrival of IBM PCs and Macs, often they were discrete learning events. Here is a widget to help you understand speed versus velocity, or a particular simulation that might be almost like a unit from the Khan Academy.
Right.
And I think the larger conversation that's underway and some of the initiatives that the foundation's doing now are more about a dynamic process that's not a discrete event, but it's an underlying infrastructure to which you pour content, as opposed to the content and the software all just one short-term unit. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I think it really is. I think you're talking about a much broader ecosystem here, and very more holistically. I think one of the reasons why things like this have been slow to adapt in higher education, one is that in some respects they've been oversold. I mean, when desktop productivity apps came out, or networking, or even the internet, I think in many cases it was oversold as personalized learning, or basically helping the learning process, which I think was overselling it. It was doing great things.
With due respect to your former employer, the whole notion of user-friendly DOS, we knew wasn't so user-friendly, and insanely great Macs had their need for user support as well. So I think that's just sort of part of the landscape.
Well, fortunately, I'm not that old that I was in the DOS age at Microsoft. But I think so part of the problem was a number of faculty members think of those times and not realize the affordances now, really, again, from the McGraws, the Pearsons, the Cengage learnings, that really help faculty scaffold the learning, provide flexible pathways, provide adaptive learning, personalized, etc. And so one of the things I would love to see increased and improved is an awareness among faculty on the benefits, both to them and to their students. A lot of times we just focus on the students, but I think we also have to break through and help faculty understand this is not taking control away from you, but rather giving you more control in your classroom and taking you from an analog work environment to a digital one, which can be beneficial to both you and your students.
My sense, though, is that a key issue for faculty is show me the evidence, show me the data in one sense. That for so much, and I've said this in some of the other conversations over the last 3 days, so much of what we do in both K-12 and higher ed is driven by opinion and epiphany. You think about a textbook review. It's not that there's, in the past, if I wrote a widget book and you were a reviewer, you'd say, I'm an expert in this field, Green's done a reasonably good job, and the strengths of this book are X and Y. That doesn't tell you anything about the educational experience or the outcome of classes that actually use that book. The analog might be testing for a medical intervention. You've got to bring evidence to the market and get past FDA trials before that goes out to the marketplace, as opposed to here's a review, here's an opinion going forward. And faculty, I think, understandably act out of enlightened self-interest. Will this be better for my students? How will this make things, in one sense, easier or more effective for the work that I want to do? And a lot of that we have just not brought into the conversation for these resources and tools, at least not yet.
So I totally agree with you. I think that we're still early in the efficacy research. The foundation is funding some research with SRI to really show the benefits of this. And so I think that, coupled with we're seeing that the major providers are also realizing and that this is important, that I think you will see an explosion of efficacy research over the next 12 to 18 months. And so we will be able to bring to faculty that information. Now, just as an aside, we don't have that for traditional learning. So when faculty say, well, show me the efficacy in online learning or courseware, etc., that's a valid statement, a valid request, but at the same time, show me the efficacy research for traditional. So I think you will see more and more of this as performance-based accounting, etc., are becoming more important.
I think that let's focus on the faculty part of this as well. I think the second part, particularly with technology, is making technology safe for faculty. Is it reliable? Is it effective? Is it the efficacy? How do I use this effectively so it doesn't embarrass me in front of my students? I go back to folks who didn't keyboard or had other folks doing that for them at some point. I mean, this too, I think, is all part of the environment of user support and recognizing user support in its various forms as being an essential part of the infrastructure to leverage these resources.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that I see many faculty who realize that they have to do something different in order to improve the graduation rates of their students, the success of their students. And they think some of this technology may in fact do that, but they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to appropriately integrate it into their pedagogies. And I think that your campus computing survey shows some of that same data there. So I think that there does need to be a concerted effort to help faculty. I think we're in a window, 5 years, maybe 10 years, that faculty need to have those supports, whether it's done on campus with the instructional designers or the teaching and learning centers. I'm not really sure, but those would be a good place to start. But you're absolutely right. They need that help. And even the younger faculty coming in who may be digital natives, but they don't know how to use in a pedagogically appropriate sense and need that assistance.
The whole issue of pedagogy with faculty of any age and in any era has been an interesting question. Typically, folks that come out of graduate school, get no pedagogical training. They essentially emulate what they thought has worked well, in the classes that they had. It seems to me there's a second part of the faculty question, and that it's a little bit of a conversation I had with Michael Crow yesterday, president of ASU, and that is expanding the algorithm for faculty recognition and reward. He talks about a change in the culture. Admittedly, that may not be part of the conversation that the foundation is trying to foster with post-secondary education as well, but it seems that that's part of it as well, that for faculty to say, this is an important part of my academic portfolio, who I am, it's not necessarily another ad and an added burden, but a matter of a rebalancing of the portfolio, saying, this is what I do, please acknowledge and give me recognition and reward, and a more openness, a broader definition of scholarship.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's not a part of our remit. That's a very heavy lift. But I do believe in my heart of hearts that unless the tenure and promotion and the reward system account for some of that, it's going to be very difficult. I am seeing some trends in that direction where some institutions are having a teaching professor track, where it's not the research track, and it's not quite the same as the research tenure track, but there is acknowledgement of the importance of teaching and the fact that we have to reward people who spend an inordinate amount of time improving their teaching and student success. And I think what we'll see over time is a bleed from that group to the research faculty members.
I want to go back to a little bit of your bio. You had some involvement with the Spellings Commission. We are now marking, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Spellings Commission report. I've mentioned this in some of the other conversations as well. The mantra, if you wanted to reduce down the report, was access, affordability, and accountability. You mentioned North Carolina, an effort on affordability, and yet many of the things that that the Spellings Commission talked about are still very much with us today through both that administration and the current administration. I remember a photo op very prominently, Mrs. Spellings, who was the Secretary of Education, holding up the FAFSA form that was multiple pages and saying we need to get it down to one page, both in her tenure as well as through the current administration. Still, we need to do better, but we still have the long form FAFSA. What gains have we seen since Spelling?
Well, I think not nearly enough. I think that when I look back in the period, what I feel is most important, and this is not to sidestep the question, but she really started the conversation. She held these convenings both in DC and around the country and really brought people together to start thinking about these things. So it put it on the national agenda, which I think has continued to today. When I look back, we have not made nearly as much progress as we should have in those things. But I think that we're at a point now where the economic situation, the social situation, the technology is coming together to allow us to make progress on those areas. So I would hope that, say, 5 years from now, if you have this conversation with me or other folks, you'll see significant progress, not completely eliminating those problems, but going back and saying, yeah, here's when the conversation started, and here in the last 5 years is when it really took off.
All right, so let me come back to Mrs. Spellings. You mentioned the University of North Carolina. You are an alum. She is now the president of the University System of North Carolina. That appointment did not occur without a little bit of controversy. Speaking not, and clearly not, as a representative of the foundation, but as a private citizen and as an alum, above and beyond some of the operational challenges that any system head and a college president or chancellor confronts, what are the 2 or 3 strategic issues? Were you to write a letter, or were she to actually click into this, the archive of this webcast at some point late at night? President Spellings, attention must be paid.
Well, I wouldn't pretend to know what's best for the University of North Carolina system, but I think that in her first interviews around this, she nailed it as far as increasing accessibility, a larger percentage of the population in North Carolina being able to go to college, also increasing the ability to have affordable education, and also diversity. So those were the 3 things that she talked about, and I would highly support those 3 things.
And a 4th or 5th you'd throw in the truck?
Well, I think that better integration of technology and better, I just did a tour of a number of institutions in North Carolina, and so many of them are doing really, really good things, but it's all one-offs. So how can the system coordinate some of the efforts and share best practices? Matthew Raskoff, the vice president at the system level, is trying to do that. And of course, he's in Spelling's office. I think more credence should be given to that as opposed to everyone doing their own thing. There needs to be some customization, obviously, but share some best practices so you can move quicker.
Essentially, you're talking about some of the same challenges that confront the foundation in terms of pilots that becomes transportable and scalable.
Right. We have lots and lots of examples of islands of excellence out there by individual faculties, individual colleges, etc. And that's one of the problems I see. We need to scale these very systematically, and systemically, and that's what the foundation tries to help do. But I think colleges and universities need to do that also.
Great. Jim Ptaszynski from the Gates Foundation, thanks for joining us. We are moving through our interviews. Next up is going to be Bridget Burns, the director of the University Innovation Alliance. Bridget will be with us in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks, folks.